What's up, everybody? Alternative Blacks Podcast is back. If you have been following us on Instagram, you know we have been going strong with our live series every other Thursday. So if you aren't following us, make sure to check us out at Alternative Blacks Pod.
We haven't had an official podcast episode since November of 2021, but don't worry, we have 2 never-released episodes for you to kick off Season 3 of Alternative Blacks Podcast.
The first will be with Broken Chair Brewing Company in West Reading, PA, and the second will be an episode about my experience at Dock Street Brewing Company in Philadelphia.
So make sure you're following the show wherever you listen to podcasts, and make sure you're following us on Instagram at Alternative Blacks Pod to keep up with what we're doing all year long. We're back, and we're thirstier than ever.
Just shanking up some audio.
Because we don't have one of those fancy
clappers yet.
I'm
too broke. Ready?
Yeah.
What's up, everybody? Back with another episode of the Alternative Blacks Podcast. I didn't hesitate. You saw nothing. You saw nothing, Chris.
About to say, were you about to call this the Average Blacks again?
Far from average.
We're alternative.
We're alternative, yeah. So today we have the privilege of being in Dock Street South, Dock Street Brewery South location, which is on Washington and 22nd Street in the Point Breeze neighborhood of Philadelphia.
I see what you're about to do there. You're about to do that Philadelphian thing where you just say it like you're the center of the world, so you're not going to say that you're in Philly. You're just like... Yeah, everyone in the world knows where
22nd Washington and Point Breeze neighborhood is.
Yep, everyone knows. No, there are no other Point Breeze neighborhoods in the world. There's no other 22nd and Washington intersections in the world.
Not
Philly has the only one.
No, so what's really fun about this location is I was doing my ancestry, and it took one of my Irish relatives that had immigrated over, found himself in the Philadelphia area in the Dock Ward, in the old Dock Ward, and that's where they get the namesake for Dock Street, is because in pre-Prohibition, where everything was being made, that was a booming brewery area.
Okay,
right?
Did they start down in that area at all? Or
they started on 18th and Cherry, and I have no clue where that's at. But I don't think that would be it.
Yeah, I mean 18th would be closer to the water than
we 22nd, are now. But I mean that's you still haven't crossed Broad.
Right.
So because everybody knows where Philly is and the geographic locations and landmarks.
Everyone knows.
But then, so that's my mom's side of the family. But then my dad, obviously being the Washington side of my family, so finding ourselves on Washington Street, I thought was a pretty cool thing. Give me 1 second. I can't see.
Tyler is blinded here by...
no, I think someone was trying to get in, but we are
closed.
Yeah. The dim lights should be a giveaway, but we might get a couple of those people.
It's a day giveaway. Yeah. Maybe it's just because they see people sitting in here.
Yeah, the 2 people, no bartenders, nothing else.
Clearly we're open.
Yeah.
Wait, we? Clearly you're open.
Yeah. I do work here. That's the fun part. So.
And that's what we'll be talking about today, because
after we're having this long-winded opening.
Yeah. We'll be talking about Dock Street a little bit, about your experience in the industry so far, because last time you were with us, we were trying to get our hands on some experience in the industry, some insight into the industry. And now we have some of that insight because Tyler has delved into the depths of the industry head first,
right into the fire. But before we talk about any of that,
beer.
That's right. What are we drinking today? Why am I asking you?
What are we drinking today, Tyler?
We are drinking Dock Street's Oktoberfest, which is their Oktoberfest beer. A lot of times when we hear that sound, it means good things follow. No, a lot of times when we hear Oktoberfest, we are thinking Marzen. But this time we're looking at a fest beer. So I'm not reading off the board or anything, but a fest beer is going to be medium-bodied lager fresh bread aroma and flavor, crisp, some word I can't read, quenching finish. Crisp, thirst quenching finish. I'm going to edit this. I think it's nice. It's a little break from a lot of the other beers that you're going to usually drink in terms of IPAs and everything. And it's just that crispness is exactly what I want in this season.
And a quick word on just this beer style, even one of our, maybe not a fest beer, but all Oktoberfests in general, specifically a Marzen for myself, one of my favorite styles of beer. Drink it all year round if I can find it. It's just a lot of places don't do it until like the September, October, and then after like the beginning of October, you're getting into your pumpkin beers, your autumnal. Beers.
You will never hear me say I'm looking forward to a Sam Adams beer unless it's Oktoberfest.
This is true. Although I will say Boston Lager does have its place if you're going for something.
They actually remade the recipe. There's a remastered version that's going to be coming out. They did a test version in select locations, but they remastered it, and I've heard it's better than Boston Lager original.
Wow, Tyler, you have so much insight into the industry. However, did you get that information?
Well, the person that did our logo works for Boston Beer Company now, so I get a lot of wonderful insights.
So now you guys know we are actually industry plants.
Yeah, this is just a sell. I've been told I can't badmouth Sam Adams anymore.
You didn't badmouth them all that much originally.
Right. I just can't really tell my true opinion on Utopias.
Please, let's hear it.
No, I can't.
Oh, of course.
But we're drinking the Dock Street Oktoberfest. What are your thoughts? Like, you've gotten a couple sips now. How do you feel about it?
I feel like it's a lighter bodied beer than your traditional Oktoberfest. Maybe less malt comes through. It's almost more akin to a Pilsner than a Marzen would be, or a Marzen's kind of a little more, slightly darker, a little more malty, if you will. This is much lighter, much more akin to a Pilsner, which to me feels more like summer, feels more like easy drinker, versus an Oktoberfest is slightly heavier for me, and it kind of gives off a little bit more of that bready taste than this does. I enjoy it, thoroughly enjoy it, because I love Pilsners and I love Oktoberfest, so it's kind of like somewhere in the middle for me.
And it's nice. We're ending the month, because it's the last week of October, I believe, with an Oktoberfest. So I think it's a perfect beer to just start the show off with.
Right.
Yeah, I see what you mean with there. We did a live last week, so the second to last week of October, with Brandon Montgomery. He came in on his way to, I think, LA or something like that. He was on the train, which was just nice of him to jump in like that. And one of the things he talked about as being a beer judge, and was it Cicerone? Yeah, was that experience of sitting down with somebody drinking a beer and having two completely different experiences and being able to talk about that. And I think that's something that we have unknowingly done throughout all these episodes. And it's been fun to go through that journey together. So I'm excited to be here. We can start talking about the history behind Dock Street and go from there. Because it opened up in 1985.
Yeah, that's nuts to me, actually.
So they like praise themselves as being one of Philly's, one of America's, but Philly's first craft beer. It's an all-grain brewery. And 1985, still running to this day. That's a great track record.
It's a great track record, especially with the likes of Yards, which is another one of those breweries that's been around for forever. And I would have assumed, unknowingly, I would assume that Yards would have been the oldest, like, microbrewery, I guess.
Yeah, I would have failed at some craft beer history out of Philadelphia. Yeah. Oh my God, how have I not gone to a Quizzo like craft like beer trivia? Why
do they have those?
Why aren't there more of those?
Usually when you go to a craft brewery and there's trivia going on, it's about anything but the beer.
Yeah.
But I feel like there should be some beer related trivia sessions at a brewery.
Maybe we can start
in
that.
our brewery.
Yeah, seriously.
When we have a brewery.
Which is the whole reason. We'll get to that point later where why I'm working here right now. But so 1985, they open up. It's a couple. They're married. It's Rosemary, and I actually don't know her ex-husband's name. They open up the brewery, and for
a little foreshadowing there.
Yes, yeah. They open up the brewery, and everything's going well for a while, and they actually decide to sell it at one point, and they sell the brewing company to somebody else, and the story goes that it just wasn't doing as well as when they first originally opened it. Distribution used to be a lot better prior, and then just things started to go backwards.
Really?
And at that point, I think Rosemary went through a divorce. Don't quote me on any of this. I'm doing this all off the top of my head. Went through a divorce, whatever, decided to buy back the company herself, and she got remarried. And she got remarried to an architect, and I think had a lot to do with what happened in terms of the space, because the space is fucking amazing. I love this place.
It really is.
But they open up, they get another location. Their original location was 18th and Cherry. Now their main location is in West Philly on Baltimore Ave, and their South Street location, or South Philly location, is what we have said earlier.
Slightly north of South Street, right?
Yes. But they were known to have some really experimental brains. Really experimental brains. Beers. Yes. They did a...
well, it takes experimental brains to have experimental beers.
That's right. So. They had a craft beer. They had a beer that was like a Walking Dead themed beer, but it had goat brains in it.
Like actual...
Yes. Then they had a Wu-Tang Clan beer where they like part of the process is you depending on the type of beer is you actually need to move the barrel around or something to like help move stuff around. It's a certain beer. I went on a tour. That's how I got this job. But something needs to happen. Obviously, I haven't learned enough as we are learning about beer to explain what it was, but essentially over that time period, what they did was just blast Wu-Tang Clan. They got some speakers up to the barrel and just blasted Wu-Tang Clan at it. And they actually, for the release party, RZA, no, it wasn't RZA, it was Inspector Deck came out.
Really?
Yeah.
Really?
So one day, there's a phone call. It's Wu-Tang Clan's lawyers. And they're like, because they had been reaching out, trying to get people here. And they're like, hey, we heard what you are doing, and this is a cease and desist. And so the person takes the phone. They're like, fuck. What are we going to do? And then they pick up the phone. They're like, hello? And they're just like, are you still there? Like, yes, we're still there. And it's just like, we're joking. We love this. We'll be out. Like, and the Inspector Deck came out. Wow. They DJ'd it. If you go to the West location, there's a signature from Inspector Deck.
We got to go.
Yeah, there used to be. Oh, yeah, there it is. There it is.
I noticed that earlier, and I was like, huh? But I questioned it, and I was like, I never bothered to ask.
And so it's one of those beers that when I looked at it originally, it became that question of when we did our first episode and we walked into Mary's and we realized no brewery's black, like black owned. And then there's all these black images, but there's no like black ownership behind it.
Right.
And so that's what we saw here. I walked in, I saw the Wu-Tang Clan thing, and I felt some type of way about it. Then I went on the tour and they told that story, and I was just like, okay, they still didn't get permission ahead of time, but at least they made that effort. They reached out and everything. And I'm not saying that's the best way to go about it.
It's not the worst thing.
Exactly.
It's not the best thing, but it's not the not best thing either.
Mm-hmm. So, they had some very experimental things happening here. I think when they reopened, their mom was very much behind. The son, I think it was Sasha. He was brewing, doing some pizzas as well, and they moved away from that. They have a different brewer. But that's to say as well, I'm sorry for everyone listening to this shit, because I'm trying to do this all off the dome based off of like 1 or 2 like iterations of hearing this.
Should have went on the tour longer.
Yeah, seriously, we're not
just going 10 different tours.
But the owners never brewed. There's always somebody else brewing. So, and I think they were having, originally it wasn't brewed on site. Like someone else was doing the brewing, and it was then distributed, and that's why they had a much larger reach. And then when the ownership changed, I think they started doing more in-house stuff. And then that's why distribution became a little harder. And then they just kept doing that when they got back. Okay. Don't quote me.
Sounds legit to me.
Yeah. Originally, we were supposed to have more people on the show.
Hey, don't tell them the secret. They'll be here any moment.
Yeah, exactly. Hello?
Hello.
That was really good. But it's still nice to be here having these conversations. We're looking to have more conversations with industry people. That was the whole point of me getting into the industry as well, to gain some experience and get some insight on what it's like to work at a brewery.
Absolutely. So then, Tyler, how is it to work at a brewery?
So I got in on the ground floor, essentially, which would be very low-level type of shit. I'm food running, grabbing glasses, bussing, this sort of thing. Yeah, bussing, bar back. Yeah, a lot of things, right? Which is fun. It's rewarding. I'm getting to know a lot about like the business end of things and how operations go from day to day. Seeing how management manages.
How do they manage to manage?
Yeah, exactly. And it's also interesting to see not how much free beer is given out. I'm not going to say we're giving away free beer here, but that's always been something of interest, especially when you're selling something.
I agree.
You go to a brewery, they give you a free beer every once in a while, right?
I definitely agree with that. I've thought about it too. It's like, okay, how does that happen? Is it more of a, we're selling it at this price, we're making this amount of profit on it? Is it something where we go, as long as it's within a certain amount of margin, we're okay? Is it, what does that look like? Because you think about, food, like with food, like food costs, and you're giving away free food, or you're losing food somewhere, how much is that going to affect your bottom line to give people, say, like a shift meal?
Yeah.
Or something of that nature.
Right.
And that's, of course, my like adjacent experience to like how a restaurant works in terms of, does this restaurant allow you to have a shift meal? Is it one you have to pay for, or is it, like for a lot of times with a smaller business, it's like, okay, you can have the certain things are free, but if you want to pay, say, for meat, you have to pay for the meat for the dish, or you have to pay for the meat of the dish, so it's at a discounted cost. But I've seen that where it's it's just much smaller business where you're already struggling to hit that bottom line. You're still trying to get your workers a meal, but you can't afford like meat prices or something like that, so they do it that way. I've always kind of wondered with beer, how does that work? Something like that.
Right. And so as far as I have seen, the bookkeeper hasn't like said anything to ownership or management yet, to a point where they're coming in and just like, all right, guys,
we got to tone this down a little bit here.
Right. So
these taps are flowing a little free right now.
Yeah. And that's always the interesting part, going from changing a keg at a frat party to like changing the keg here isn't much different, but it
is this what we're doing?
Yep.
We're doing.
I think the difference is like you're not carrying this up a bunch of stairs anymore. Like you're not doing anything and then trying to drink it immediately too, right? Where like as soon as you put it on and like all the stupid stuff that used to happen to kegs when you were in college, that was happening.
Oh yeah, totally.
I was expecting that like 1 or 2 times when I went to like change the kegs here. I was expecting just like it to like burst out, and one of my coworkers actually did have one that like
I'm sure it happens.
Yeah,
it has to, but
for the most part, it's interesting to go back into the walk-in to like change that keg to see like the different contraptions that work, and it's pretty simple.
But once again, this is how it's supposed to be taken care of. Right. It's not one of those things where I'm gonna go out and buy this keg, and then technically there's like things you should do so that it's working properly, so that you're getting the beer flowing properly and you're not just getting foam.
Right, because what's different was from doing it at like a party to doing it here is you used to put like the keg handle on, drop that, and then you had a little nozzle, and then you were doing it was all foam for the first hour.
And why is that?
I don't know, but like this, it feeds up to a system which has a little aerator like nozzle thing where you have to like before you change it, you unloosen it or whatever, and it drops back in, and you put it back in. You hit the button, and it pushes it through a couple times, and then the beer flows steadily after it gets sent back out. But there is no extra process when you do it by yourself. You just do.
Yeah, I think a lot of it has to do with the pressurization of the system. I think a lot of it has to do with the way that kegs are stored and handled at a brewery versus you think about the journey that a keg that you buy at a distributor goes through just to get there. Just the ranges in temperature, all of the jostling around to get it on a truck. The truck drop, the ride out to the place, throw it in the back, then someone buys it and they wheel it out to the car, and then it goes home, and it's like and then they get there and it's probably warm already at that point. It's just sitting there warm, and then you go it's like take a beer off the shelf that's warm, shake it up and pop it open. What do you expect to happen? Right.
And I think I knew the beer wasn't as cold, but I didn't realize how warm this beer was, because it was shitty beer to begin with.
It was already terrible.
Right. And now it's just like, oh, what is your cooling system? Oh, you put 2 ice bags on the top of the...
Amazing.
That'll do it. Meanwhile, I'm in the back trying to change a keg, and it's like this huge thing that I have to move, and I'm back there going...
Well, just think about this. Now that we've brewed our first beer,
that's right.
1 gallon worth, it necessitated about 20 pounds of ice, right, to cool 1 gallon of beer, of wort, I guess.
Was it 20?
I believe it was 2 10-pound bags that they specified that you use. Now, whether you used it all,
actually 10 pounds?
I believe it was either 10 or 20 pounds of ice.
I think it was 10 pounds.
Okay, so imagine it's just 10 pounds of ice. For 1 gallon of beer, how much does a keg hold?
That's a great question. Should we Google it?
More than
6 bottles.
Yes. More than 6 bottles worth.
Bottles worth.
Like
That's a good name.
Jesus Shuttlesworth. Yeah, let's make He Got Game, but it's He Got Grain, and it's about beer, and we'll have Jesus Bottlesworth.
Jesus Bottlesworth.
Jesus Bottlesworth. Indeed.
So I forgot to ask, like we derailed from the history. It's pretty much over of Dock Street, but we never gave a rating. Like, what would you rate this Docktoberfest?
What would I rate this? Ooh, this is tough. I think I might go a 3.75 to a 4 for myself. It maybe it's just me. Maybe I haven't had enough fest beers, the newer age version, but to me it doesn't hit quite like a Oktoberfest should. It's a little more on the Pilsner side, which is kind of has its place, but it's not Oktoberfest's place for me. So 3.5 to 4. So I'm gonna land at a 3.75.
So the only time I've checked this in apparently was back in 2017.
2017.
September 29th, 2017.
Where?
Canal Street.
Really? Those guys are so awesome.
And I did not like it that much back then.
What'd you rate it?
Oh, I gave it a 2.25.
You see how ridiculously harsh you are with your ratings?
Because I really enjoy this one now. Like, this is one of my favorite beers out of here. I love their Prince Michigan. I love their Citrus amazing. This is a pretty good one. I like their rye. I like their bow. Yeah, I think drinking with you a little more deliberately and not like over the shoulder looking at what we're rating, but actually having a conversation about what we rated and why we rated it that way, I've eased up a lot.
Yeah, well, at the same time, I think I might have gotten myself a little more harsh. Mm-hmm. I think we're regressing to the mean, because you'd be down at like a 2 or something crazy, and I'm just like, 2, really? Then when we think about it, it's just like, okay, like, what is your barometer for average? And my barometer for average is higher than yours, so I'm gonna rate beers higher than yours naturally, because I'm thinking, oh, if this is average, I'm here at a high 3 to a 4, meaning this beer's pretty damn good, I'd go back to it.
Right.
And you're more like, well, 3.5 or 2.5 is technically halfway, so that should be average, right? It's kind of how you.
That's how I used to do it. So like,
about it, but it's like
this was a little below average at first. Apparently,
it's kind of crazy to rate a beer like. Say you didn't like it. It's like, this beer is slightly below average. It's not my favorite. It's not horrible. And you go on and you give it a 2 out of 5.
I am so happy. I'm so happy that like we're able to do it in these like quarter increments.
And that's what we used to not be.
Because I was at Felino Estate doing a wine tasting, and they have that little scorecard. It's all based off of 5s, and
yeah.
I had based something off of like a 2. Like I was like, okay, this is a 2. And then I had something that I gave it a 3. And then I had something that I didn't hate, but I liked it less than that one. I was like, well, I have to give this a 2.
Yeah, exactly. So yeah, it is nice to have the quarter increments, because then you can really start to differentiate. But originally it was just the half increments, and even that sometimes is kind of like, that's a lot.
Right. So we're at Dock Street. Because I've been able to like work here, get to know a little bit at least about this like South Street location and see how things run. What questions, because we've never really had too much conversation about working here.
Yeah. I think the first question is pretty much, what does the workforce look like?
All right, so this is the interesting, like, front of house. I'm thinking like bartender, like anyone that's gonna check you in, like take your order, all of that kind of stuff. Light went on in the kitchen.
Ooh, is someone here?
I know.
Shh, be quiet.
Hello. Hey, what are you guys doing here?
Drinking.
Yeah, seriously. That's not quite as diverse yet. There are some racially ambiguous people. I don't go into that questioning a lot of like, hey, like,
what are you?
You don't look fully white. You're a little tan. What are you, Italian? Not gonna do. I hope they're listening to this too. I'm like, Tyler, what the fuck are you talking about? I will say the best representation that I see here is women. Like, and it's a woman-owned brewing company, you know, which is awesome, because that's part of when we talk about underrepresented individuals within the space. That's definitely one, and I think that's where they do really, like, what they do really well is having a lot of like managers are women, like, ownership's women, a lot of the like upper management team all women. So like I think that's pretty cool. When I see like those big meetings happening here, it's just like maybe a guy or two, and then everybody else is a woman. I'm just like, this is awesome.
That's positive.
Yeah, kitchen staff, like pizza. The pizza guys. Again, not sure there is a language barrier there, but usually Latinx. You know, like I'm believing Mexican. just from different like words that I've heard used, just based off of like what, we went to like Reading, so like what we used to hear in the hallways based off of different slang that everybody had. I'm trying to think if there's anybody else that's black. Like there's PJ, who basically does everything in the back. He's dope. He's black, but I don't know if there's anybody else. There used to be a bartender, I think that was black. I'm pretty sure every time I see PJ, like every time I've seen a black person, I think it's been PJ. But on the other hand of that, there is a real good diversity of people coming in. Like, I will say there aren't many days here that like I don't at least see a like handful of like black people come in, which is cool. Like I like that. Definitely like one of those different interactions as I'm running around like bussing things where I'll get that like head nod of like acknowledgement, even if I don't ever see their table. Like one of the first times I see them, I get that like little nod, which is cool. And that's like that experience that we talk about a lot of times. Like what does it feel like to walk in and actually
see,
be seen, but not be like eyeball. Yeah, exactly. What are they doing there, right? So that's been cool. I like there's been some Jehovah's Witnesses that have like been in here, which I thought that was really cool. Like the old like black auntie, like, and had like some really cool conversation with them because she was coming in the door. I was having good conversation with them anyway, but they were coming in the door, and she was, I got to talk to them. The last bartender, she poured it. There was no head. Like there's no foam. This has foam. I'm looking at it. It's like a good amount of foam. Like not a milk pour. I mean, it's like it's the perfect amount. And I'm just like, no, like that's a good sign. Like that's a good pour. Like it's gonna be a slightly different flavor, but it's the flavor that you like are supposed to experience in your beer, and it should last about the amount of time that it's been in there. So. You don't have to go in and say anything, but it was cool to have that exchange and that experience and having that knowledge to share with someone who didn't obviously have that knowledge about beer because they were.
And how was that experience? Was it a good conversation?
Yeah, because they trusted me. Like I think that's also the difference of like if they would have went up to the bar and said that. Yeah. I don't know what that trust level would have looked like. But I was out there having those conversations with them, sitting down, talking, and like getting to know that they are Hennessy drinkers,
What?
Talking about some other stuff with them, what they used to drink. Like they're from this neighborhood. So like we were talking about this new development that's happening out on Washington Street and seeing all these different things. So I got to hear, like they knew this place from being like a tile factory and like other, like like they used to repair cabs in here as well. Uh-huh. Like they knew the history of the neighborhood. And I think that's the cool element. And that's something that I've been looking to get from working here is talking to people, but there aren't many people that hear, oh yeah, I've been here for 20 years, Right. And I think we've had many conversations about the red flags of breweries popping up and just watching that happen.
Watching that, no, I don't know. I was trying. I was trying. You saw the gears turning. Didn't happen. Okay, so I guess there seems to be some positives here in terms of the demographic. You have women owned, women managed, primarily women managed, and that's a fantastic sign.
All my upper management are women. Like anyone that I refer to is
While that's not the community that we represent, it is one of the many underserved or underrepresented communities in craft beer industry. So that's a positive sign. You make up, it seems, a large amount of the diversity here.
When we're talking about like blackness?
Yes.
Yeah, 100%.
So then I guess my next question would kind of be, what is the 50. Work environment like? Not just not just what's the demographic of the people, but what's the actual environment like?
It is pretty easygoing. I would have to say that as a whole. That phrase always gets me.
Easygoing?
Well, as a whole.
Oh, as a whole.
Very flexible, as long as I get my request out there for needing off, in a reasonable time. There's hasn't been an issue there. I've covered a couple shifts, and the one I wasn't going to be able to make it there for an hour or so, and I was able that was able to be taken care of, where so and so was supposed to have a shift. I was able to cover the majority of the shift, but not the whole shift. Was the line of communication about how that was all going to be managed completely clear and taken care of? No. I would have. I took a lot of the extra steps to ensure that everything was going to be okay, and that I wasn't going to walk in and be yelled at for where were you for the past hour? Yeah. But it was fine, and it all worked out. Training was 2 days. Here's a opening shift, here's a closing shift. All right, do it. But I picked up on that. Get to work. Yeah, I picked up pretty well on that. I have a lot of fun here. I like the people I work with very much. It's not to say that people don't butt heads, especially when things get busy, but that's just
that's life.
You brush it off your shoulder, oh, this isn't directed at me, this is just the situation. So I think that's good. We pretty much have free reign of whatever we want to put on the TV, so I think that's cool. So whenever I get a chance, I put on something black. Because we sell pizzas here, so the first day that I got a chance to do it, I put on Do the Right Thing, right?
There you go.
Right. I just thought it was funny, but I thought it was oh, this would be cool to put on stuff. We've watched Blade. We've had a very Gerald, he's a movie buff. Casey's a movie buff. We have a lot of movie buffs in here, so they put on a lot of diverse stuff, which I think is nice. You get to see a lot of different genres explored, and a lot of conversations be had around it, and
nice.
That opens up the conversations for the people that are at the bar as well, because they kind of get to dictate what gets put on too. But
right,
it's fun. You come out here, you get distracted by the TV for a little bit, and then you go back to doing your job.
Okay, so I guess my next question then would be, you've worked in this brewery now for, has it been 2 months already?
It feels like it.
What is one thing that you would say is most surprising about what you've seen so far?
Ooh, that's a great question. It's fun to be on this side of the table right now, being interviewed essentially. Wow, what is the most surprising?
Huh, gotcha.
Yeah. I thought there was going to be crazier times in terms of volume sometimes. I thought I was just going to die after my first shift. I thought I wasn't going to be able to handle it.
Just unmanageable amounts of business, in rushes,
right. And I thought it was going to be so
1 or 2 hours.
Yeah, I thought it was going to be so inexperienced. It's just get out of here. But everyone's been really warm and open, welcoming. Some people don't like beer. That's been funny, to see and witness.
People who work here.
Yeah. It's just I think there's a lot of things that, because of wanting to own a brewery and coming into this knowing I want to own a brewery, I am picking up on as being this level of a worker, how do I like being managed? We had this conversation off mic, and we compared it to parenting. And, your parents are giving a version of how they were raised, but they're taking the things they like and using those, and the things that they didn't like and changing that. And I think that's what I am experiencing in the present.
Okay, so you obviously you're experiencing the front of the house right now more so. Have you been able to get a sneak peek of the actual brewing process?
I went on that tour.
Yeah. Other than going back and looking at, there's big shiny vats back here.
Exactly. Not as much. One of the bartenders helps with canning from time to time, and so he's had a lot more conversations with them about the different processes. And the brewer sometimes will sit at the bar and talk with us through the different beers. So that's usually that's very informative, and he actually had a chance to sample the beer that I made and talk me through what I was experiencing.
Okay, so then what did he think of our beer, or your beer, I guess? Because we've had our beers now, and they're slightly different.
They're slightly different, and he was able to identify some different things based off of just like it opened up, and it was like, okay, at least it's carbonated, right? And I even think about like I was like, oh, this is a nice sound, but I didn't think about like, oh, things could have been very wrong if I never heard anything. I didn't even like it didn't dawn on me.
Which is funny because for me, I was terrified that when I opened up my first beer that it was gonna just you open up and it goes and that's it.
Right.
And I was like, shit. But no, that first sound of like that pressure relief, I'm like, okay, cool, something's going on here. We at least got that taken care of. Yeah.
Then it was like, you know, it was a little more clear than it looks now when we had it today. So he was like, you know, it's a clean beer. You know, there's nothing sitting in it. All that like little trub at the bottom like didn't get into the different batches. And I thought that was going to be the thing for me. I was really concerned I was just going to have a bunch of shit.
Yeah, and what was nice about the fermenter that we have is obviously the spigot is up high enough on,
which I thought was
the
like
glass.
I'm looking at this presumptuously like, oh, this is a fucking design flaw. How am I going to get all the beer out of here?
It's like, oh yeah, you don't want to pull everything out of your beer.
Yeah. It was just interesting to watch, just being a more seasoned beer consumer, just talk about like, oh, you know, it definitely seems like this is probably a 2-row versus like 6-row, like the malts and like all like the different and just being able to identify that stuff. And the questions that were asked weren't things that I knew, like were things I could have known, but I just didn't know like what information to retain.
You didn't know that you needed to know some things,
right? And I think looking at those labels that they shipped with it, which we didn't utilize,
you're right,
was just like, oh, all that information would have been on here if we would have like utilized it the right way. But I think I might get Amy to make a different version so our branding's on it.
Oh yeah, and also I think another thing about that would be, you know, we've done a batch. It was a pre-made recipe kit, right? And we're gonna do that at least the first couple times, you know, at least the first 3, 4, maybe 5 times, or maybe even for each distinct style that we try, do a recipe kit first. Mm-hmm. But you know, I think going through, for me personally, in terms of the brewing process, to get tangential really fast, would be, you know, how do you know this without testing a finished product? How do you know what the ABV is without testing a finished product? How do you know what the IBUs are? You can taste the IBUs because that's the whole point of IBUs, right? But what does that mean? Scientifically, there has to be a barometer to that, right? I mean, there has to be.
Yeah, and I think that's something as we continue on, it's going to be like what we're able to start identifying.
Absolutely.
We're going to be able to be like, all right, you know, this, maybe we'll get better at doing it with other beers, but we know now, like, okay, this is supposed to be brewed at like a 95 IBU. This is supposed to be like more bitter, right?
Right.
Is this actually, and I think that's what we can start like looking for, is like, okay, we know from the kit it's supposed to be this bitterness unit. Let's get a beer to compare it with that actually got brewed to that, like that they put out like that,
right?
And see if we're able to like, oh yeah, this is as bitter as that one.
Yeah, and it's one of those things where I do believe there's, once again, brewing is both like a science and an art form.
100%.
In the sense that, you know, there is science to it, but those small distinct differences that make this beer worlds better than this other beer that might be almost a similar recipe, it all has to do with the craft of it. It has to do with the tactfulness that you do things. You're doing things at this temperature, and
right,
we're going to take it off a little sooner because I know how my system works or how I work.
Right. And I'm before we get into this beer, I had a question. I lost it when I looked over there. Fuck.
You're supposed to look up and to your left, I thought, to think, not to your right. Isn't that what it is?
JD?
I don't know. Is it steak night?
fuck. Oh my god, I had a
sorry.
good question. It was going to be perfect. I thought it was a great transition into.
While you're thinking of that question, though, I'm just going to talk quickly about the bitterness, the IBU thing, because I do believe that it has to do a lot with the alpha
acids.
Acids, yes. So I know the alpha acids are all some.
Are we talking
hops
about
that have,
this because it's alpha? Continue.
So the alpha acids, right? The higher the alpha acid, the more bitter the beer is going to be. So if you have a hop that's high in alpha, then you would have a bitter. So that's what you would use as your bittering hops. Those are the ones you put in early as your bittering drop. Those cook, and as they cook, those acids are released and create the bitter.
Right. And then
versus
later on you put
the
in
beta,
stuff for the like aromas.
Yeah, the beta is going to be your aroma. And you put that in at the end so that you get more of the beta out of it versus the alpha out of it, because those betas break down quickly. The alpha doesn't. So, and then you have your noble hops, which can do both.
So noble of them.
Yeah, so noble of them. But I believe from my limited thought process, people that know are going to be like, well, yeah, duh, or no, that's completely wrong.
Right.
But I'm like, well, okay, so, I want to put this amount of hops in to get this IBU. This amount of grams of hops at this alpha acid will get me this many IBUs. I believe that's kind of how it works. Okay. And I put it in here at this point in the boil. That will get me all of these IBUs. That could be it. We'll find out as we do more research.
Seriously. So as we're opening up Man Full of Trouble, which is going to be their porter.
Well, that was badass, actually.
Right? It's going to be their porter. I think it was the science and the art behind it conversation that was being had. I think what's been fun about having the conversation about our experiences with it is even being able to see now, without ever having been in the same place while it's happening, where our strengths and weaknesses might lie. Because I think through our text having conversations about the what do we need next, everything, I think you have that understood a lot better than I do, and I'm just pulling the trigger before I need to pull a trigger on something. I'm like, I got a 5-gallon carboy, and I was like, well, we might need a 7-gallon, and I'm just like, well,
what do I do with this?
I have the 5-gallon.
It'll work. It'll be fine.
Right.
Everything's fine.
But when we were talking about how we boiled the grains initially,
when we were creating our wort,
right? I think this is the art element of it, where it's just I think instinctively mine were less cooked than yours,
right?
And that created a little bit of a different flavor.
I think once again we discussed that our beers were different, and I believe the big difference for us was
I forgot hops.
You forgot hops because you were being artistic, and I
Did you just call me autistic?
Art.
Art thou autistic?
Art thou autistic? You were being artistic, and I was being, so you forgot things because you were kind of being a little more free flowy about how you were doing it, versus it said boil these things. So I was like, okay, a boil means this, and I'm going to get it to that temperature, and that's what I'm boiling.
I haven't gotten the video out yet, but I recorded my whole process, and there was a point where I was just like, okay, it said boil. Does it mean roaring?
Rolling, or does it mean a soft boil, or a lighter boil, whatever?
I see bubbles. Let's go for it.
Yeah, versus me, where I'm like, okay, what does boil mean? Okay, boil must mean rolling boil because that's an actual boil by definition. Therefore, I am going to wait until there's literal action going on everywhere on the surface. It's not just it's not just slightly moving. It's got to be a violent boil. So it turns out that all of my ingredients got cooked out far more than yours. And I believe my malt came
through a little stronger,
way stronger to me. And as far as what the beer was supposed to be, it was supposed to be a session IPA, which is on the lighter side. And I looked up session because I never thought to think, well, what does session IPA really mean?
I always think about that. I just never took the time.
I looked it up because I was asked. So a session IPA means an IPA that is a session anything means it's low ABV, and it's basically called a session because back in the day, workers were allowed a shift, like a beer every 4 hours or something. Like there was a 4-hour window where they were allowed to drink during their workday or something. And so that frame of time was called session. So they would make the beer closer to like your table beer that's 5% or less, really low ABV, because they don't want people drunk.
Right, it would
working.
be like your farmhouse sessions, like because
right.
The
so
reason
that's
you had the farmhouse because like you were using like some of the stuff that was happening there as well, and that's why you get those earthier stuff. But
this beer would be specifically, if it's session, it's just a beer specifically brewed to be
who are
less
you
ABV.
Talking to?
I don't know. I'm just like
you look this way. I went like
I don't know. Yeah. I don't know. It's like the opposite of breaking the fourth wall. I'm just like going completely AWOL.
Broke the first one.
I broke the first wall.
You broke the AWOL.
I broke the AWOL. Oh man,
that was funny as shit.
So that's what session means. So that's what we were brewing. It was supposed to be, I believe it was supposed to be 5 or 6%, if done exactly to how it was supposed to be done. The nature of it, I feel like you hit the spirit of the beer more than I did.
I don't think either of us knocked it out of the park or got it right, because we look at the picture online and it's so much brighter than
it's so much brighter. And once again, I kind of feel like
I think we both cooked it harder than we should have.
Yeah, you might have cooked it longer and I might have cooked it harder and longer. All that being said, if there wasn't a thing to go off of, I believe they were two decent beers. Like
I would drink that beer.
I'd drink that beer.
Yeah.
I would.
I have, like, almost everyone that I made try it, I drank it with them.
Yeah, and that's another difference as well when we're discussing this, because you came out with 6 to 7 bottles. Seven bottles, and I yielded 8 bottles.
The 7th bottle I thought was going to be shit, and that was the first one I tried, and I was like, oh my god, I love this.
Yeah, and so that's another question I had for you in this discussion was, how have your beers been? Were they different at all each time you've had them? Has it all been consistently the same?
I think it's gotten cloudier. Every beer I think gets a little less clear, which is interesting. I don't know the like process behind all of that completely right now. Initially, I had put it in my fridge, and I think I put them in on their side, and so there was residue. When it was on its side, and I was like, oh my god, these are gonna all be shit. And opening the first one, I was like, holy shit, this is great. So I think that's why I prefer cans. I think I like the glass fermenter, but I think I would prefer to get to a point where we can can stuff, because then I don't see that stuff.
Yeah. Now my experience, so did you throw all of your beers into the fridge like the moment you were allowed to?
Yes.
Okay. So that's another big difference. I was being extremely scientific with this one, where I was like, I will put this beer in the fridge and I will try this beer, knowing that, you can hold the conditioning step, the priming,
an extra
sugar,
week.
an extra week. I want to see how each of these beers taste individually. I will put them in the fridge as I want to drink them. And so I don't know if it was a situation where my palate was screwed up originally on that first try, but that first try for me, it was so much grain and
you were saying
malt taste, like so much, and like there was a small amount of bitterness at the end. I could get the hops like right at the end, and that was it. But these ones that the one we tried together and the two that I've had since, way better.
Yeah.
Way more cohesive. But once again, I think we both did a decent job for our very first time. I was very
proud of everything for it being our first time. We're wrapping up the episode. And it's Dock Street, so we opened up one more beer. Let's talk about this beer and close out the episode.
Yeah, absolutely. What we have here is Man Full of Trouble. It's a porter, and it has a 2017 bronze medal. If I can see,
another bronze medal for this. We have another bronze medal.
From the American Beer Festival. So does this particular beer has another bronze medal?
I think so.
Or
I think it's like three-time bronze medal.
3 times since 2017 then?
No,
or that might have been the third time? Or
you'll see a poster when we leave. There's a 2-time poster, but then I think like someone was wearing the bronze medal the other day, and I think it's like the third time.
Well, hell, this is a damn good beer.
Yeah.
And it's... One, I love the artwork, and I think you had mentioned the artwork earlier.
Mm-hmm.
It's just kind of like a sailor dealing with like a kraken, and there's like a raven on it, and there's a monkey too. Like, what the hell is going on?
There's a lot going on.
The more I look at it, the more I'm like, what is going on? This is why I don't go out to sea.
Yeah, seriously.
Because he's not even far from sea. There's a lighthouse right
seriously.
there. There's. Did you really just...
I
Did you
tried.
seriously just...
Yeah, so it says on the side, 5.2, 30 IBU, a liquid not the only pre-revolutionary tavern still standing in the city of brotherly love. Man Full of Trouble was one of colonial Philadelphia's first watering holes. This London porter-style ale brewed with old world in mind, black and chocolate malts, created in deep mahogany appearances and creamy espresso-like flavor, which really does stand out. A blend of English hops lends a delicate, earthy presence. I think it's fantastic.
Yes, and of course, I always appreciate the use of the word mahogany.
Mahogany. So what would you rate this before we close out?
This is a 4+ for me, like off rip.
Off rip.
It's not particularly cold, which is also kind of like a cool thing.
Yeah.
Because once again, like these traditional, English style beers are kind of more meant to be had at room temperature, so it's actually kind of at the perfect temperature.
Yeah, I
the
love
espresso,
it right now.
The espresso, like
beautiful,
all about the roastiness of the hop, the hops, the malt,
because there are hops in it, though.
Yes, but obviously, and it's one of those things where I used to be super seasonal. And, I can only have a porter in the wintertime, and I can only have an IPA. IPAs in general all year round, but certain types of IPAs, summer. Wheat beers, summer thing. I would never want anything like that when it was cold. So things of that nature. And I'm not that anymore, but every time I have one, it kind of brings me back. It reminds me of a time of year.
Yeah.
Especially when it's a good beer, and that's what this one does for me, that's what this one does for me, and I think good styles kind of bring me back to a particular time of the year, and this one kind of just, I feel like I'm sitting in a room in like the winter time.
I imagine being at like Hidden River and just like in that den area where it's cozy.
It's cozy, and we somehow are never there when it's warm. It's always when it's
freezing,
getting cold.
I will have to say this about this beer: I've never had it at this temperature.
Doesn't it help?
When it's cold, I'm not as enthusiastic about it, and I think maybe my issue with porters has been having them while cold.
Yeah, you might need to be one of those guys that just has room temp porters, room temp stouts.
Stouts have been better, but the porters have always been not my cup of tea. Because it's not tea. Port.
Yeah, it's actually beer.
Yeah, unless it was poured out at the port, the Boston Tea Party.
But we're in Philly, the center of the world.
That's fucking right. I think it even says Center City on here somewhere too.
No, maybe you're right. Maybe that's something you should. Explore more.
I think I'm definitely gonna experiment. I cannot wait till we get to the the heavier beers. I think we're trying to just get these ales out of the way because that's what we primarily consume. That's what's known a little better. We have more things to compare it to, and then once that style's kind of like taken, like done properly, we can move on to. I'm not even sure if it's trickier beers. It's just not as widely explored.
Yeah. I know that stouts and porters are notorious for blowing up during fermentation.
Oh, that'll be fun.
So we
definitely got to upgrade my
fermenter. At least need to. I'm thinking of investing in some shower curtains to surround my beer with.
Yeah.
At that point, but I think that's going to be the trickiness about it.
Yeah.
I think the most difficult thing something that I've heard a lot is the most difficult thing is a lager, because you can't hide your deficiencies as a brewer behind anything.
Right.
A lager is going to be like the clearest. If you can make a great lager, you can make a great anything. So that might be the last thing we try after we kind of get our feet under us with brewing, is to try to make a lager. And I think if we can nail a lager, our own recipe, after we do all of this, if we can nail that, I think we're golden.
We can nail anything. Yeah, I completely agree. I think this was a great episode. I hope everybody that's listening agrees. If you do, make sure that you rate our show on Apple Podcasts and follow us wherever you listen to podcasts at.
Yes, and if you don't tell us. Go screw off. No, I'm just kidding. Please tell us what you think.
Yeah, we'll always take that feedback and move on with it. But you know what? Until next time.
Peace.